Thank you all for waiting. Just to update you, uh, Finance Minister is running a little late. She is already on her way. We are expecting her to be here in the next 10 minutes. So, just an update to you guys. Thanks for
It's my honor today. 70 years of NCAR. It's an honor that Finance Minister and Minister of Finance and Corporate Affairs for a long, long time. Before that, a Defense Minister, Ma'am Nirmala Sitharaman, has come. Being the Finance Minister is a very difficult job in any country on any day in the world, but because a modern state is a welfare state, but I think productivity requires you to make yourself a fertile soil so that you don't finance the welfare state with public debt. And in the last few years, we have had many shocks. We've had COVID, we've had tariffs, we've had war, and we've had technology. And it's sort of wonderful to have a steady pair of hands, at least some sort of steady thinking. There are no good choices on any day, given the multiple demands on the Indian state, given the multiple demands on Indian financing. But I think there have been sort of 3 or 4 wonderful balances struck. I think that there are no fiscal conservatives left anywhere in the world for whatever reason. I don't know why discount rates have become so high, but today's debt is tomorrow's inflation or tomorrow's taxes, and India stands as a bright star of thinking about how you want to hand over your public debt, how you want to hand over the country to the next generation. I think shifting to capital expenditure has been a wonderful part of Madam's tenure. And more importantly, in her last few speeches, I think that old saying about, not more cooks in the kitchen, but a different recipe. And in one of your recent speeches, you talked about how patents, products, algorithms, ideas, and innovation are key to India's future. So I will keep my introduction short, and we have lots of questions for you if you have time for that. Thank you. The Parliament delayed you, but thank you for making it. And we would love to hear your long perspective on the past and the future as this institution, which is celebrating 70 years today.
So thank you very much, Manish. And I walked in a bit confident, but I'm seeing some stalwarts in front of me. And I'm sort of telling myself, tone down. So Professor Panagadia and many others who I can name here, but it really humbles me to be here and be able to share some of my thoughts. Just as an opening remark, I've put in a lot of my, let's say, observations in the light of the experience that I've had here for some years. So I am commenting on a lot of situations. It's not because I want to be party politician here. But yet, Indian economy, being guided by political leadership, will have a political dimension to it. So my comments be taken in that perspective. And with that said, also because today all of us are sitting and looking at Indian economy, fitting milestones which have the benefit of hindsight, and Indian economy being in the globally uncertain environment, you have an advantage again to look at it and see how we want to take it forward. And so we are at a very, very advantageous position to talk about Indian economy. We've had varied experiences, and we are also at a point of inflection where you can say this is how it's going to go. So I think as I would have loved to be a student in a university. I still consider a student. I learn from professor and very many others even today. But to be a student in India, in a university or in a college today, would tell you at one go so many things, which when I was a student, I was taught only that economics in a given framework. But India itself has gone through 3 or 4 different frameworks in which our economy is positioned and has grown out of or grown into. So I think this talk therefore comes at a very advantageous time. And I think as a finance minister, I think I've been given the advantage of all these past reflections of many of these eminent economists who are seated here. And therefore, my talk would derive from the learnings that I've had, not just being in the chair, but in the seat, but also by the readings. So, good evening. With that opening remark, it's a privilege to deliver C.D. Deshmukh Memorial Lecture at the 23rd India Policy Forum. This year marks the 70th year of NCAER, founded in 1956, with the support of the Ministry of Finance, and on whose first governing body Sri Deshmukh himself served. Warm congratulations to all of you all. Sri Chintaman Dwarkanath Deshmukh belonged to our first generation of institution builders. And I'll be quick in adding builder of beautiful gardens as well. So I've had a great deal of admiration for him, for not merely the great institutions like I think IFCI was built by him. He was the first governor of RBI, NCAER itself, and the UGC, Indian Statistical Institute, and IIC, India International Center, are just a few among the several that he had been instrumental in founding. But that aspect of him, where he had taken a lot of interest in plants, in wanting to have beautiful gardens around him, brought in a dimension which normally you don't see in public persona. Also because his education has been in biology related subjects, I think, but it brought out such a versatile individual before me, and therefore I'll bring in both the dimensions of the individual as much as both the dimensions of the Indian economy itself. The softer, nicer side, where despite odds we've been growing then and now. When I say then, I'm talking of the first 4 decades, and now, as much as the challenges that we face. So amongst various steps he also took, C.D. Deshmukh, he strengthened the RBI, he built its research capacity, which would go on to become the Policy, Research and Statistical Department at a time when central banks across the world did not find it necessary to do so. So he was a very forward-thinking individual, so he could do a lot of things in different institutions. So the title of this lecture places 2 words side by side, ambition and destiny, and I will speak in 3 parts: our foundations and our fault lines up to the turn of the century, the pivot at the turn of the century, and the 2 decades ahead of us, and the destiny that lies beyond the centenary itself. So consider the republic inherited in 1947 for a moment, a partition that displaced millions of people, mass poverty, chronic food insecurity, and a thin and a narrow industrial base. This was tested almost immediately in 1947-48. Further armed conflicts followed in 1962, 65, and in 71, and each emergency fell upon an exchequer which had no reserve to absorb it at all. But we plowed along. That diversion of resources was a price we paid for remaining sovereign. So nature offered no relief either. The droughts of 1965-66 brought India to the edge of famine at a very moment our defense needs were highest. So through it all, ordinary citizens, and this is very important for me, like I would talk of the gardens of C.D. Deshmukh, I would talk about this contribution of Indian citizens. Through it all, ordinary citizens gave their savings to the national effort, and in many households that even meant donating personal gold and savings. In 1971 there was a military conflict and a victory, as all of you all know, and also a demonstration of India's moral strength in standing for democracy and human dignity. when very few others could, borne alongside the cost of crores of displaced people, the refugees. It is against this scarcity and insecurity that India's early choices must be judged. The Soviet centralized planning model did not well retrofit to India's conditions, and it degenerated into excessive concentration of authority amongst the select few. The license quota permit Raj concentrated discretionary authority within the administrative machinery of the state, and the investment decisions moved from the market to the bureaucrats and political executives. Centrally funded, gigantic state run projects eventually bred inefficiency, cronyism, and corruption. The system rewarded a few favored entities and narrowed the field for genuine Indian enterprises. So, alternatives were argued and argued for at that time by people of standing who were amongst the ruling dispensation and were not heard. Evidence also rarely found a seat at the table. So it was C. Rajagopalachari, for instance, who named that system as license permit quota Raj. He stated in an essay titled Workman Quarrels with His Tools. And I quote, it is in the Indian Libertarian magazine of 1963, December 15th. I quote, permit license quota Raj, which sits heavily over all national production and trade, was conceived with the intention of preventing chaotic development and illegal exploitation. But in fact, it has impeded development and actually promotes exploitation. What appears as progress has been achieved in spite of the incumbents and not on account of regimentation, unquote. This progressed further, although this was written in 63. I'm talking of something which happened a bit earlier. John Mathai was made to resign as finance minister by Nehru, our first prime minister, following his protest at the increasing power of planning commission. And he said in June 1950, I consider the planning commission not merely ill-timed, but in its working and general setup ill-conceived. The planning commission was tending to become a parallel cabinet. It would weaken the authority of the finance ministry and gradually reduce the cabinet to practically a registering authority, unquote. Just for us to remember, we know the planning commission, which was founded in March 1950, was a non-constitutional, non-financial, not a statutory body, just a cabinet resolution gave it some authority, and it ran writ till 2014. So when we are talking of strengthening institutions, strengthening democracy, strengthening the federal system of center and state, we've left the authority to decide on development, the allocation of resources, all to a non-statutory, non-constitutional body. And it had to wait for 2014 to be revamped or disbanded, and a Niti Aayog was formed. But the fact remains that you're retrofitting and also removing the authority, constitutionally given authority, so your economy is being governed through agencies which were not directly answerable to the parliament. A consensus that cannot hear its critics discovers its errors late and expensively. Yet it would be a distortion not to acknowledge that while there were such problems, few foundational steps were taken for institution building as well during that time. Early India also placed genuine faith in science and technology. We established great institutions, technological institutions like the ISRO, the BARC, the BHEL, and the IITs. We built them with confidence to seek the best collaboration in the world. German assistance for IIT Madras, Russian support for IIT Bombay, American collaboration at IIT Kanpur, and IIT Delhi, I think it was a British collaboration. So iconic irrigation and power projects were also undertaken at that time to empower agriculture. However, their implementation moved at a snail's pace, and the water distribution, for instance, networks stopped short of the last mile. It would be amiss on my part if I don't mention Pokhran, one, the Smiling Buddha, which also happened in the middle of 1970s. Yet we were critically dependent on external powers. We relied on the USA for food grains and the Soviet Union for the bulk of our defense platforms. So too little attention was paid to exports and India's place in global trade at a moment when several East Asian economies were building their entire growth model around it. I'll just quote a thought, not really as a quotation, but as a thought which comes from Friedrich Hayek. The problem of long-term central planning. I'm paraphrasing what Hayek had said in so many different words. The problem of long-term central planning is that it assumes that things will not change much over time. The big advantage of decentralized and personal decisions when it happens at the ground level is the personal decision making itself, is that it responds to change minute by minute as the change happens because it's in your face. Whereas when you're doing a centralized planning, everything top up, that immediate response to change does not happen. And therefore, the late 1980s and 90s also underscored a difficult lesson in political economy. As stable central authority gave way to fragmented coalition politics, governments started to prioritize political survival over long-term strategic decision making. One, you assume that in the long term nothing changes and nothing changes so significantly because your centralized planning assumes that. And another, political instability also left the long-term planning for development by the side, and political survival was the only creed. Religion-based politics brazenly sidelined the developmental agenda of the nation. Policy continuity weakened, decision-making slowed, and the capacity to undertake ambitious reforms diminished. So the crucial years were lost despite the severity of the stress. And I would like to read out something from Professor Panagaria's book. It actually captures everything that I would want to labor in explaining to you precisely. This is his book, The Nehru Development Model, History and Its Lasting Impact. This is one book which all of us will have to read from the beginning to the last, every page. It's such a beautifully written book. I quote here, "Though the country did come to terms with its mistake and changed course in 1991, says Professor Panagaria, by then it had lost 4 precious decades. Moreover, the history built over these decades continued to haunt its development efforts even after the change of course. For one thing, the base income remained low, given that the opportunity to grow rapidly had been mixed in the early decades. Therefore, even an acceleration in growth to 7 to 8% range on a sustained basis could not deliver genuine prosperity for another few decades. Moreover, 4 decades of patronage of socialist ideas and policies came to hardwire Indian politicians, bureaucrats, intellectuals, and even business people in ways that made a swift march to a market economy politically challenging. Unquote. What better words can capture what had happened in the first 4 decades and its overhang in the next few decades? Thank you, Professor. So here, the reforms of 1991, while significant, were undertaken amid acute balance of payment crisis, making them reforms born of compulsion rather than of choice. So a decade was lost, or 4 decades were lost statism. But I would quickly want to move to 2000. From the year 2000, the turn of the millennium brought a fundamental shift. The 1991 changed the track. I recognize that. And after that came the 1998 Pokhran II, India's strategic deterrence, and demonstrated that genuine strategic autonomy rests on credible national capability. So in 2000, with a fundamental shift, economic development, physical connectivity, and digital infrastructure moved to the very top of national agenda under Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee. The golden quadrilateral telecom revolution, which opened up the space for public and private, and Garibi Hatao, which was the slogan for decades, actually started showing results because of the way in which technology got into our lives. And that, you can see, has carried through till today. That when UPI's success is being talked about, it's the success of the small entrepreneur in some corner who sells his product to the digital connect, and as a result, the economy benefits. So technology in a democratic country has actually helped in Garibi Hatao rather than our slogans. The decades which followed after that, or at least one decade which followed after 2000, inherited that momentum for a time, and it rode on it. Growth in the early years of 2004 and 2009 were on the dividend from the strong economics of NDA earlier. However, when the global financial crisis set in 2008, the age-old savings behavior of Indian households helped us to stand up and meet the challenge, and together with the conservatively regulated banking system gave us the resilience. But it's not as much that the shock that affected us, but after effects. The after effects were the ones which we had to worry about. Over the next few years, the fiscal deficit widened, subsidies grew faster than capital spending, and inflation ran close to double digit for years. So the habits of coalition survival that I described earlier, for not allowing the tenure of the government to execute in all its seriousness, had returned. Phone banking and the twin balance sheet problem became the order of the day. So terrorist attacks and red corridor, all problems added to the economy's baggage. So a decade which began with promise was lost to statism again. So, but after 2014, I'll move fast to say many of these fundamental issues were kept aside and only development was before us. Financial inclusion became top priority. The JAM Trinity showed its results. Inflation targeting framework was formalized with the Monetary Policy Committee, which gave a clear objective of maintaining price stability while keeping sustained economic growth in mind. The mounting NPAs were recognized and treated honestly rather than deferred. I again strongly recommend the book written by the former governor Urjit Patel on how that phase of decision making happened and how banks were brought back to health. He's done a very minute, detailed writing, which will make an essential read, I would think, for economists. The IBC 2016 also gave India, for the first time, a time-bound process for resolving failure and creditors' right to be paid. So the digital public infrastructure, the GST, the science and technology agenda of the country had to be carried forward, the setting up of new IITs, AIMS, IIMs, and so on. So I'm really not getting into details, but the trend continued towards development and reform rather than looking at many of those pet issues of the bygone era where we had a centralized planning. But just as India had gathered the momentum to accelerate, the external environment turned sharply adverse with successive disruptions and unprecedented global uncertainty. A rare black swan event became a recurring feature, which included once-in-a-century pandemic. Yet India did not allow these shocks to become an excuse for stagnation. Reforms did not pause. All this while, we also witnessed multidimensional poverty decline to historic lows. Again, as I said, technology helped us in many ways. Spurious payments were stopped, direct benefit transfers benefited actual deserving beneficiary, and so on. So, with crores of Indians moving out of deprivation despite an exceptionally difficult global environment. So, what do we really mean by Vikasit Bharat? I come to the two words which were put before me: aspiration and destiny. So, what do we really mean by Vikasit Bharat? Prime Minister has given us that goal by 2047. This matters because a goal that is never defined or measured cannot be pursued or achieved. Consider the long arc. For a minute, I'll again take you back to Angus Madison, historical estimates of world output. India accounted for roughly 1/3 of the global GDP at the beginning of the Common Era, and close to a quarter in 1500 AD, the Common Era. By 1820, that share had fallen to about 16%. By 1870, to about 12%, and by about 1950, to roughly just 4%. It touched its floor of below 3% in the early 1970s after the centralized Soviet era planning model. We reached 3% of the global GDP contribution. Today, it stands at about 8.5%. India's poverty was never a steady state. Let's recognize that. It was manufactured after centuries of invasions, colonialism, and we then prolonged it to ourselves for another 4 decades after we were free to stop when we attained independence. So Vikasit Bharat, therefore, is not an unprecedented ambition. In a way, it's a restoration. As I elucidated in this year's budget, Vikasit Bharat is not an abstract aspiration or merely a target for per capita income to grow. It's a nation where there is zero poverty, 100% quality education. Every citizen can obtain high quality, affordable, and comprehensive health care. Every young person is equipped with skills and meaningful employment. Women participate fully in the economic activity. And our farmers make India the food basket for the world. And we shall be the leaders in tech-driven knowledge economy. 2047 is no longer a distant aspiration. It's an immediate national horizon, and a good deal of it must be settled within the next few years. India at 100 and 100 years of independence is not a conclusion of a journey. It's a milestone within a much larger and longer civilizational continuum. Our ambition is not to merely improve upon our present. Our destiny is to stand among the foremost nations of the world. And I quote Sri Aurobindo here: India lives not for herself, not for herself, but for the world. India has a role to play toward unity and peace of the world. So laws made for the subjects have to be made into laws for our own people. So we have to get over our colonial mindset. Prime Minister gave a call for it from the Red Fort when he addressed the nation August 15th. India must reject the psychology of victimhood. I find that repeatedly being the tone and tenor of, oh, but it's all right, we can never achieve this. Oh, it's all right, you did this, but you can. That sense of victimhood should get out of our heads. Our financial institutions, governance structures, and public resources must widen the circle of opportunity so that enterprise in India is augmented by both ability and also access. Our banks are all for all Indians, not just for a select few. Banking must continue to be an instrument for inclusion, ensuring that the aspiration finds support rather than barriers. Mudra Yojana has actually made us entrepreneur of every citizen who wants to benefit from the Yojana, and that is going to be the most important thing, that we should recognize the entrepreneurial talent and skill in each one of our citizens. Quality education, as I said, quality healthcare, as I said, are entirely non-negotiable as national priorities. And again, I like to go back to our ethos. When I say quality education and quality healthcare, our rulers, our emperors, our kings made provision for public health. And this is just not to talk about our grand past. It gives us a lesson on how to handle it. I'll just give you this example to the place where I've gone. I've seen it all etched in stone. A place called Tirumukkudal near Kanchipuram. An inscription from the reign of Veera Rajendra Chola, who ruled in 1069 Common Era, says that the temple revenue was to be divided into three ways. One is for the temple rituals, a college with a hostel, and a 15-bed hospital called the Veera Cholan Hospital. Very clearly etched in stone. It also names the physicians who were attached to the hospital, the surgeons, the nurses, and their salaries, which were paid in paddy, bags of paddy, and medicines, which included Brahmi and many others, inclusive of castor oil, this herb, that herb. And he made a provision of 5 acres of land attached to the hospital to grow those herbs. And he gave a provision that annually you will be given this much of resource to cultivate these. A 15-bedded hospital, mind you, and with land endowed permanently as Vaidya Bhogham. He gave it as a Vaidya Bhogham. So it's not new. Giving public health enough resources by the rulers is not new to us. So it is part of our ethos and we should be proudly carrying it forward. So the point is that charity existed, and that is not just the point. It is that prosperity was consciously converted into permanent public institutions, embedded in our own tradition. So the point is not that charity existed, but the point is that prosperity was consciously converted into permanent institutions embedded in our tradition. India's future must be built upon a partnership between generations. The older generation carries the wisdom and memory of this nation. That memory does not keep on its own. It fades when it is not transferred. The younger generation brings the energy, the innovation, the leadership to execute the next phase. They are also the people who will actually live in 2047 and beyond. So we need to have a partnership between the younger and the senior generations. Again, Sri Aurobindo, India's destiny is to be the spiritual guide of the world. And this can be achieved not by preaching. So the moment we say spiritual, we tend to think, oh my God, okay, there's some preaching. No. So Aurobindo himself says, this can be achieved not by preaching, but by herself adopting high standards of national and international behavior. So when we talk of Vikasit Bharat, it is only a milestone in a large civilizational arc. Our destiny is not preordained. It is as much as we put in it. The choices we make, the institutions we strengthen, the civilizational roots, and the legacy we leave will determine it. It is shaped, it's not received. Our ambition is to create a grand society where modern progress is anchored in our civilizational heritage. Our destiny is to become prosperous without becoming consumerist, wealthy without becoming materialistic, and globally successful without losing our civilizational character. Our model is neither consumerist nor mercantilist, as wealth has meaning only when it strengthens our society as a whole. Wealth and resources carry obligations to society and to generations yet unborn. We may enjoy what we inherit, but we, as trustees, are not entitled to exhaust it. So there is a compelling economic rationale. Water polluted upstream reaches those downstream. Air, rivers, and biodiversity do not recognize property lines or neighborhoods. A philosophy of individual rights alone, without collective responsibility, will affect our future generations. Responsibility is owed not only across generations, but across the entirety of creation. So, just to conclude, thank you for being patient to listening to all that I've been saying. India's ambition is to become a developed nation by 2047. India's destiny is to become a developed civilization. That civilization combines prosperity with trusteeship, enterprise with responsibility, innovation with civilizational wisdom, global leadership with cultural rootedness, environmental stewardship with economic progress, and individual success with collective welfare. The true yardstick will be whether each generation leaves behind a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate and more capable India than the one which it inherited. So, thank you very much. 2047 is not the destination, it's the milestone which we'll have to cross for a continuing civilization that is India. Thank you very much.
So, do you mind, ma'am, what do you know now after 7 years as finance minister that you didn't know when you took the job? What have you learned?
I wish I can answer it in one line. A lot of things. And the answer is more derived from my conversations with other finance ministers. India is a lot more complex, diverse, and a challenging country. So it cannot fit into any kind of comparisons that you make with other countries. Oh, they are doing this, can you not? We can, but under different circumstances. Each country can be different, but India's altogether a different story.
What do you think is the role of luck in countries? I mean, I don't want to live in China, but sometimes I think back 1978, they got a 40-year cycle of global openness to trade, global deconstruction of manufacturing, global growth. That's not the hand India has been dealt in 2026 for sure, but maybe not even in 2000. And how do you think that this luck versus sort of generational luck? There is skill, but how do countries think about opening balances? How much do we control? I mean, we obviously have to have a strategy. We have to have this. So in the sense, how do you think about, do people make history? History makes people. How difficult is path dependence of countries?
Manish, I don't want to discourage you
Mm,
with my answer.
mm,
When we pick to say, oh, look at China, they've had a 40-year fantastic arc of growth, and therefore we fail to say that prior to the 50-year,
mm.
40-year cycle, there was a phase, I was reading about it in detail. China allowed its people to do things. Millions of what do you call attempts. Entrepreneurs were allowed to do things. Many failed, many succeeded. Those succeeded. Once that trial and error, which was allowed to do in the ground, gathered a momentum, is when China comes up with policies to bring in synergy and bring that aggregation benefit. So it is that China did it very well. The luck role comes in there. But prior to it, there was a time when they were all trying and trying and trying, and success came. So I strongly believe when we talk of countries, I mean, look at Japan. There was a time that the Americans were quoting, these Japanese will come and do everything. I mean, they will sell everything to us. They'll be manufacturing. There was that fear of Japan's productivity, efficiency, discipline. But would you then say luck was then and luck is not there today in Japan, when yen competing with the Indian rupee in terms of facing the challenge which the dollar poses to it? Look at the way they don't know how to get out of that cycle of, debt, mounting debt. I'm not comparing India with Japan at all. No, please. But to answer this question, we need to look at economies and the days when they are up together when the days where they are down, and what brought them up. Just sheer luck wouldn't have had it. There's many more to it. So China and Japan themselves stand out. Today, what activity or what alertness prevails in the US when they're looking at China and want to take on them? 30, 40 years ago, that was the position of United States looking at Japan. So you will have to get your energies together. And that is why I played a bit strongly on that line when I said, get over your victimhood. You'll have your luck, Manish. We'll do it.
Yes.
But that's when we believe that we can do it. Take risk. And at that time, no, just don't look at those success of today. Look at those prior to success of those countries earlier. Of course, I'm not saying that you should only do that and constantly keep explaining your inefficiency. No. You have to constantly reform, move fast in getting out those undergrowth, and make our systems a lot more transparent and speedier to work. But yes, just not luck, whole lot of other things.
We've talked often about federalism, the role of states and the role of center. There was a interesting debate 20 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, where a prime minister said strong states lead to a weak nation. And then a chief minister responded, well, the central government is a conceptual myth. Everything that matters to citizens is done by states. Both were probably wrong. The Madhyam Marg is probably. But how do you think about federalism, center versus center and state? How do you think of that?
I strongly believe states have to be strong. I strongly believe states have to be helped. I also strongly believe laggards among states will have to be told that you cannot be a laggard. Many a times we hesitate to say the fact, but they have to be pulled up. It cannot be that some states can do well and some others can remain where they are. We have to give them every handholding to get them to be powerful. With that said, you also need a center which has the resource to take care of the defense of this country, which takes care of having a policy which will enable exports, which will enable manufacturing. So it cannot be left to the states, and states are, beggar the neighbor policy of get the industries, get the investment. You need to have a center setting all the clear tones for getting your investments right, your policies right, and ensure that parts of this country which remain for a long time underdeveloped will have to be brought on for to catch up with the rest of the country. So there is a role for the center, and that role cannot be played by one or two states, never. But yet, unless the states, and I mean each one of them, is empowered and given the resource and also given thoughts about how capacity can be built, the aspirations of India cannot be met.
What do you think would be the three biggest challenges for us to rise up to? Is it energy? Is it human capital? Is it, or it's all of the above? Because you just said India's growth strategy has 5 pillars: a trust-based regulatory system, quality infrastructure, stronger global partnerships, macroeconomic stability, and continued investment in future generations. I think that is the right systemic view. But as you think about constraints to be overcome, is it energy? Is it human capital? Is it trade wars? Is it technology? The AI is there a worry?
I think these are the outcomes of one above it, which is readiness to change or absence of readiness to change. See, there is a need, and we don't have the luxury of time. There is a need for states and also the local bodies to quickly realize they are running out of time. They have to come out openly, to be transparent in what they are doing. Resources are available. In fact, I would say the current Finance Commission has given us, the local bodies, the urban local bodies, the 16th Finance Commission, I have Professor before me, has given ample resources for urban local bodies and the rural local bodies. Do you have the capacity, the manpower, the technical wherewithal to use that resource which has reached you? And the one condition which governs these funds from being used is you should be a democratically elected local body. If the elections are not held for years on end, the money lies there unutilized, a portion of it. One portion is given tied, another is given untied. So there are issues of readiness. Are you ready to be devolving the financial powers to the third layer? Are you ready to hold elections? It cannot be that center and state alone have elections. You need the local bodies to get a democratically elected set of people to determine what they want to do in their local body. So, whilst I agree energy will be a constraint, or we need to get over problems related to energy, we need rare resources to be utilized properly, all that is there. But above all, is there a readiness to change, to reform, to make sure the institutions deliver, so that people don't have to, feel that in some parts of the country there is a lot of work happening, and some others it's just being delayed.
I have lots of questions, but does anybody have a question? Ratna, you want to go? Yeah.
Thank you, Manish. Honorable Finance Minister, pleasure to see you again. We had met at the IMF. I worked there for 33 years. Now I'm working here at NCAR. Um, I absolutely, let me just say it very openly, absolutely loved what you said. Very close to not just my heart, but we started the conference this morning. And, as you were speaking and you were talking about breaking away from our colonial past and the legacy, the socialist legacy, uh, there are three things that come to my mind where reforms are desperately needed, and I'd love to hear your views on that. Two of those issues came up today. So one was, uh, land is, acquisition of land is identified as probably the most um, constraining factor for private investment. Uh, how do we break that shackle? Number two, this is one of my favorites coming from the IMF, is this idea of 40% reservation for priority sector lending is clearly a legacy from the past. It's distortionary, it's inefficient intermediation, and I'm not saying that don't help, the smaller firms, but there are other ways of doing it. Do it directly. Don't distort the market. And the third one, and this I saw on many missions that I went to and led, and I saw a lot of waste, is indiscriminate subsidies where the rich and the poor benefit. And again, the idea is not to leave the poor person behind. You have DBT, it's amazing what this government has done in terms of getting rid of the intermediaries, and with the direct benefit transfers and the technology, give that to them, give them cash, give them kind, whatever. But why give indiscriminate subsidies which also benefits the rich? So these are the three things which I wanted to put on your agenda.
Should I answer? See, the first point on the land, today many states have come up with ways to get around the difficulties on land. There is a central law on land acquisition, which has a very high cost to be paid for relief, whatever rehabilitation, and also the payment to be made upfront. But there are states which have come around the problem, and industry, where it goes and acquires land, also acquires if it meets this condition that it's not an agrarian land, it's land not used for agriculture. So states are finding ways around it. That's one. Second, DBT, yes, the technology has helped us, as I said while talking. The numbers vary, and I don't want to quote a number which is dated, but almost, let us say, a third of what went out is now not going out because you've removed those fraud claims. And that itself is a big saving for the exchequer. And now many, in fact, DBT is something about which a lot is being spoken about. What is not being spoken about, and I take it as my duty to talk about it, is the public finance management system, PFMS, that has been done. And extraordinary work was done by the current cabinet secretary when he was expenditure secretary. And the way in which funds which go from the center to the states for a project in which the state has to put its bit and the center has to put its bit. Most often monies went there, got parked, and sometimes it became T-bills and it didn't get used. So you really at no point in time were in a position to understand how much has actually gone, most of which is borrowed money. I'm paying the interest and waiting for the result to come down in the ground, but no, it doesn't happen. So the reform, big ticket reform, which happened in the government in the name of public finance management system, is to create a single nodal account where the state, the moment it puts its money, the center's money goes, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. As a result of which, I can tell you, the money which is not borrowed for parking is such a huge amount. I'm so happy that it is happening now, and states which were hesitant earlier see the point that after all it is borrowed money which is coming, and it cannot afford to be left there, whereas there could be some other state which will use it better. So that, like the DBT, is a major digital reform which has actually given us great rewards. So that's the second. And priority sector lending, I review it every now and then. In fact, last week I had reviewed it. The amounts which are not successfully lent out to the categories which at the end of the year comes back at shortfall, and we replow them through these institutions like NABARD and SIDBI and others, which means the money is floating around, but it's not reaching the actual beneficiary the way it should reach. We have to be more efficient, at least for some more time, so that we can continue.
Rahul, Suman, and
Thank you for your lecture. I never thought I would hear the Indian finance minister quote Friedrich Hayek, so that warmed my heart. It's really nice to. Ma'am, first of all, congratulations on the rationalization of GST that you carried out. Such a major reform. I think it was fantastic. There are several trade economists in the room who are eagerly awaiting something that you announced last year, which is rationalization of tariff rates and tariff slabs. You had announced this in a few speeches. I was just wondering if there is progress still happening on that reform.
Yes, there's progress being made. Maybe by the budget of 27-28, I'd be able to say that, barring a few items, even now barring 13 items, I think we had rationalized it, but it'll come down to single digit. That's continuing, and we'll keep it up.
go ahead.
Minister, just to say that from the 2022 speech of Honorable Prime Minister declaring Viksit Bharat to be a national goal, he has insisted that this is ultimately a project in the minds of, it's a political project for mobilizing the energies of all Indians. It's not a technocratic project. And you know, as a politician and as a successful finance minister, what is your answer, particularly to the foreigners in the room? You talked about 91 being in the absence of alternatives. How do you motivate change and reform when you're already the fastest growing economy in the world, which becomes an issue of risk and reward? Why would the government take a risk? Why would individuals take a risk for a future when the present is just fine? So what is the political answer to that?
Well, I think it's important. That is why I think it's necessary to go back to certain values we should hold as a country. It may be, for some it look as if, oh my God, you're back again quoting only those. You have to. As I said, India cannot be, given its nature, given its landscape, given its dependence on monsoon, given the way in which the landscape is not like one, like even in a small country like United Kingdom, Wales and Scotland is so different from rain-drenched England and so on. So that's a small country. But here we have huge land mass where deserts, growing deserts, and water shortage in a land which has Brahmaputra and Ganges. And the reality that Saraswati could disappear, and that entire civilization in Rajasthan, civilization is not confined to Rajasthan, but that Saraswati Sindhu. Today, you will not believe it when I say this, and it is a situation which I saw. Desert, you wanted the Indira Canal to get the water from Satluj, and we finished this GST meeting in Jaisalmer. We were coming back. Suddenly, in the midst of a sand dune, there was a huge fountain of water. Literally a fountain which continued to, the fountain flushing out the water for the next 2-3 days. Because after reaching back to Delhi and I was watching this, I kept in touch with the administration. They're saying, what exactly was that? And a huge lake got formed. Huge lake. Then when I asked the administration, they said, in the midst of the desert, that is, they said, the river which is underneath is actually pouring the water out because the groundwater table has improved. And Saraswati is, the fountain. Of course, they contained it because they didn't want it to flood the region and so on. So, a country which is scared of greater desertification, south down, Andhra Pradesh, Anantapur is becoming a greater desert because it doesn't receive any rainfall. So, the point that I'm laboring to put before you is this country and its landscape, its geography, its neighborhood, the kind of mountains still is a big challenge for us. We don't get the water where you need it. You have atrocious cloudbursts nowadays. And these cloudbursts are over huge water bodies. So the cloudbursts together, water body, flood hundreds of villages. So a country which has such contrasts, you will have to be planning, you will have to be better organized. But yet, remember, this country is unlike many other countries, which are endowment rich, which have less population, which has less diversity. And therefore, the point that I want to put in one line is we need our rights, all right, but we need our duties to be reminded to each one of ourselves. Each Indian has a duty to perform towards this country. And therefore, we have to look at Vikasit Bharat or even further, millennia of great. I was talking about 1580, I was talking about Vijayanagara, I was talking about great kingdoms, prosperity, Chandragupta. Even then, this country had to do a lot of sacrifice to keep the entire communities all on bound. So, duty and responsibility.
So last two questions. Okay, you go ahead and then you just ask
Ma'am,
both.
you mentioned Professor Panagria's book about how the Nehru development model did not just end in 91, but the legacy in some ways persisted beyond through many institutions. Do you think that's still the case? Number one, and number two, if it is, what are some of the concrete ways in which you are trying and we can help you to overcome some of those legacies of that time?
I would think some remnants continue. I wouldn't say that it is fully baggage as much as it was in 1991. But yes, there has to be deliberate effort to get out of that mold. In fact, today I keep referring to some of the books. Sometime in 21, I think 21 or 22, both T.V. Somanathan and Gulzar Natarajan have written a book on the state's capacity, the Indian state's capacity to deliver. What a rich book with contents. It'll tell you about so many different things of what is our state's capacity to deliver, and in that the point that the pre-91 legacy, the Soviet era legacy, which has gone deep into our institutions and numbing their capacity, capability, are beautifully defined, described. And therefore, how are we to get out of it is also very well written by both being Indian Administrative Service officers. There are many institutions which have come out of it. Even our public sector undertakings today are a lot more professional, lot more people-centric, and making sure that the progress will have to be measured by their performance rather than by their entitlement. So there are a lot of changes happening.
Last question.
Yeah. Ma'am, in 2020, the government had rolled out a 1.97 lakh crore PLI scheme. What has happened is that some schemes have been extended, similar schemes have been brought in for other sectors. But is there a thinking within the government as to how to support manufacturing or industrial policy for the next 10 years? Is there perhaps a thinking of a bigger package? And what would be some of the lessons you feel that we've picked up from the successful PLI schemes?
The tailoring of a scheme is very important. There are PLIs and PLIs, as you were pointing out. The PLI given for the mobile stands out as one of the remarkable successes. And there is one, a second edition of it, which has come now recently. We have to underline the fact that the stakeholder consultations will have to be meaningful. Before launch of every scheme, any scheme in government, you sit with the stakeholders and understand how they would want it to work. It's not a secret. Till the cabinet gives out the decision, we don't get into the details of what makes the scheme. But it is discussed with the stakeholders. So either in the understanding of the bureaucrat who sits with them, or the industry not being able to communicate, would be the cause for a scheme not being well tailored and successful thereafter. I would go back to talking about the ECGLS scheme that we had come during during COVID. Some consultations, but the execution took all our energy and we pushed it despite COVID. Until today, it is one of those most successful of government schemes. So not just for PLI, but for extending support even for the MSMEs and their credit requirements, their working capital requirements. Today, SIDBI is moving from one cluster to another to directly lend to these units or to give them incentives of, subsidized interest rate. So it is both in the consultation, in tailoring, and in the execution that the PLI makes a difference.
So just to wrap up, ma'am, I had one last question about, because 2047 is a long time. Many of us may not be here, so we're trying to be good ancestors, in the sense of I grew up in Kashmir. There are two words for property, amanat and jagir, right? And jagir is yours, but amanat you have to hand over in better condition, as you said in your speech. Public debt is an important topic, and bond vigilantes seem to have been murdered in America. Most places in the world, there's no punishment for public debt. How do you think, as a finance minister, about public debt? What is good public debt? What is bad public debt? And you're one of the few finance ministers, when our last conversation, you were praising state government's fiscal behavior. I haven't heard that in a long time from a union finance minister. You said, well, some of these states are now working hard, they're listening to us. And so maybe it would be nice for them, because we always hear that the states are irresponsible in their
Many of them are really now working to get their house in order. And I did recall that in front of you. See, public debt is something which I don't want to use any cliche because I can see a lot of my media friends here. You need to have debt. I don't think any country can run on its own resources. But yet, you will have to apply your mind before you take a call on how much you borrow, when do you borrow, and for what purpose do you borrow. There's been a conscious effort, and I can say with a very strong assistance and helping hand from the Prime Minister, saying, absolutely be conscious of what you're spending the money that you're borrowing from. This entire capital expenditure business from 2020, post-COVID, is driven towards building assets. It's driven towards making sure public expenditure will create infrastructure so that the economy, whoever is wherever, will be able to benefit from that connectivity. And I can say with confidence, despite a couple of years since after COVID, people have been mocking, saying, oh, you're doing the heavy lifting, private sector is not coming forward. No, private sector is come forward. And I would think it's the public expenditure that we kept doing all these years with a lot of confidence that the Indian economy will benefit from it, has actually helped the private sector to come forward, and they are now taking risks and putting money so that they can benefit from this growth that India is seeing. So in all confidence, with all confidence, I can say that this approach, that when you borrow money, you borrow it for creating assets. You borrow it and spend it for asset creation. It has its reward, both for you and for the larger public. So borrowing to that extent, I will support. But yet, each time you borrow, you'll have to look at what is there before you already. You don't borrow to service that. You don't borrow to service the interest that you have to pay. So you have to be conscious in not making that borrowing a burden for generations to come. Equally, as much as you borrow, your revenue, your own revenues will have to be ramped up each year so that that debt burden which is hanging on you should be progressively brought down. And that is why I'm very glad to have taken this approach and announcement that was made in the budget last year, that from now we will make it a point to announce through budget what is the debt to the GDP. We will be answerable to it. We cannot be borrowing and not accounting for how much is our debt, why is it our debt this way or that way. So in that note, while talking to Manish, I did say there are several states today who are conscious of what their debts are. They've had conversations saying too high cost, the borrowings have been made some time ago, can we sustain it, can we not? So using the team in the ministry, I've invited some states. I didn't choose them. Whoever approached me, I said, please sit with our team. They can help you restructure your debt, go back with less interest burden. In fact, here I can say one of the chief ministers, after having gone through this process, went to their assembly, the elected legislature, and said it there, saying, I'm so grateful that my interest burden annually has come down by X amount because the restructuring was done. And he doesn't belong to my party, incidentally. He's from the opposition party. He went to the assembly and thanked, saying, this is a great effort of the central government. We benefited by this. This is the amount I don't need to pay on this year for interest burden. So it helps. There are states which come out and seek help. And I'm glad to do this because as long as states realize that debt is otherwise not uh, a thing that you can engage and forget about it, you have to be answerable. And you cannot leave debt. Yes, you will borrow, but explain why you're borrowing, and you cannot leave the debt unattended. You have to keep priming it.
Well, it's been an honor for NCAR to have you here today, ma'am. Me and Nandan support fellowships to write books. So there's a biography of C.D. Deshmukh, which will be coming out next year in honor of his contribution. But as you know, A.C. Pijo once said, economics should not only be light bearing, it should be fruit bearing. And hopefully your speech today just reminds us about the responsibility and the duties that we have. I landed in August 94 for my education in the US, and there was a front page article on the Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope that journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, because what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. And your sort of our ambition and destiny are converging in 2047. And thank you for giving us a preview of that. It's been an honor to have you, and thank you for taking the time. We'll ask her.
Yes, I